Welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 102 with Tiffany Hitz. Tiffany is a middle school band director and a mom, which means she is one of my ultimate heroes. Thank you, Tiffany. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Great. And you teach down in Virginia. Which county?
In Fairfax County, which is a suburb, suburb of DC.
So we have a mutual friend, Linda Gammon, who is from Maine and vacations in Maine, but is a stalwart in Virginia. And she wanted me to share a couple of kind words about you, so for people who don't know you. Linda
Oh,
says, here we go, time to get the tissues. Um, Tiffany's a very passionate middle school band director who creates a culture of excellence for every student. Her ability to set a positive mindset for all is amazing. She goes above and beyond to consistently learn and hone her skills. She is a leader and a mentor for others and a most caring educator. It's pretty awesome.
that's a lot.
There you go. The title of
That's
this,
those are kind words from anyone, but
and
from Linda, she's one of my people.
yeah.
Taught me a lot.
So this is, we're entitling it, curriculum mapping. That's a big word
Yeah.
for us, three valve trumpet players, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. You have a belief that literature becomes our curriculum.
Yeah, I do. I think, depending on where you are, maybe you're given some type of formal curriculum. We have the national standards. We have a curriculum in Fairfax. We have program of studies that, kind of guides our work. But I think especially in secondary world, our literature, we spend so much time on our literature. So it really does become the food that our kids eat.
Hmm.
And so I think it's the way that we access and provide all those skills that we want the students to learn.
So you have this comment you said, so how do we effectively scaffold the skills our students need in literature rather than bombarding them with new skills in each piece? How do you approach that?
Well, I use method books, and I use a lot of exercises that I create for students, fundamental exercises, things like that, that just to build their skills. But I don't give them a method book, and we don't start, on line one and then go to line two and line three. And if you were to do that, I would argue for the most part, I mean, these are, method books that people have put a lot of work into and been highly vetted. And there's some embedded scaffolding in that type of work.
Hmm.
But since we do literature so much, we're working often from concert to concert and sprinkling in all these other things to make sure that the kids are ready for the skills that they're going to need in the music. I make sure that, as I pick a piece of music or select the literature for the year, that I go through and I identify what is it that they're going to need to know before they
Hmm.
access the piece, so that I am along the way, whether it's from a method book or from something that I'm creating for them, I'm providing them opportunities to see, to hear, to experience those skills before I just throw a piece of music at them and say, now there's 20 new things here that you have to do. And I know you're overwhelmed, but we'll get there to the end. And I think in doing that, they're still going to see some new skills in the music, but most of those skills they will have experienced in some form. Even, if it's something that I want to do a 6/8 piece, I'm going to make sure that the first time they see 6/8 and hear 6/8 and experience 6/8 is not going to be when we're first looking at that piece. I'm going to embed opportunities along the way. We're going to do some listening when they're coming in the room and they won't even know it's 6/8, just so
Sure.
that they can, get used to hearing that. We're going to do some counting and labeling and exercises and maybe play some scales well before they even are going to see that music.
Yeah. So your basic concept, if we were to explain this to somebody who wasn't even a band director, is they should have the skills or know the thing before they see it in a piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, the beauty of the method books, right, is that when you find those that lay really well for you, it's one new concept each time, and they're building on the concepts they've already taught. So you're not going to get a new rhythm and a new key signature. But when we give them a piece of music, a lot of things all at once. And so, yeah, I'm going to give them those things along the way.
Yeah, and method books, there's so many great method books out there, but I think it's really important that people use what they're comfortable with and what works for their kids. I know I'm not speaking to certain method books, but I know when I talk to my wife, who's a great middle school band director, she talks about, well, this method book I used to use, but it didn't repeat enough. It would like do a concept and then
Yeah.
it didn't have enough practice before it moved to something else. Or, so this one moved fast, too fast, or this one, there was too much in it. Or, so I think it's important that people vet all the different ones. So what's the process you use when you're choosing a method book?
I don't actually use a method book.
Okay.
At this point, I feel like I have experience in a lot of method books. As a middle school teacher, I guess I should back up. Our students start in elementary school here in Fairfax, and they have the opportunity to take band in fifth and or sixth grade.
Hmm.
And middle school for us, except for very few schools, is only grade 7 and 8. So while they can start with me as a beginner, the majority of my students come to me already having band experience. So selecting a method book that I might give them, one first thing is I make sure it's not the same book that they had in elementary school.
Hmm.
Um, because we are going to access that information in different ways depending on how their classes were grouped. They might have been in a heterogeneous grouping or homogeneous grouping, and I might want to do other things with exercises that potentially they'll have already seen. And also, we know as teachers that it's not a one and done. All of these skills are building, and so I am going to, as a seventh grade band student, I am going to have them work on many of the same things that they did in elementary school. But I, to be very honest, I don't want them to know that I'm doing the same thing that they did. I don't want them to feel like they're repeating. And so using a different book is one way that I can um I can manage to disguise that a little bit so that they don't feel like, well, we already did this, we already did this. So that is one thing that goes into if I'm going to hand them a book. But generally speaking, I started doing something a few years ago where I take all of the method books that I have and I create like an instrument folder that
Mm.
has a lot of different books. And that way, I know in this book, I really like the way this skill is taught, is approached. So I might, hey, let's pull out this book today and we're going to do these 3 or 4 exercises. But in another book, there is a different concept that I really like how it's approached. And I feel like you can kind of do that with any method book, but it's just a matter for me of like, I pick and choose from the books at this point, and I find that I'm doing less. Maybe sometimes with beginners or with seventh grade, I'll start with like, here's a book that you have and you keep. But more and more, I do that in class where they're accessing things that way. I don't give them a physical book, but we do use Make Music, smart music now called Make Music.
Yep.
We do use that so they have access to all of those books that way as well. So I'm just cherry picking.
That's great. A couple people we've had on that wrote their own method books too. I just wanted to promote. I don't know if I don't remember the episode numbers, but we had Chip DiStefano on. I forget the name of his book, but that's a popular one. And then Tyler Akari and Carol Britton Chambers have a book as well. Again, I forget the names of those, but there's so many great books out there. And I think some people say this is the book. Well, it's like, well, for you and for those kids, that might be the book, but I don't want people to limit themselves to a book because for whatever reason. Um,
I think that comes from comfort too, right?
hmm.
When it's a book that you understand how it's laid out, if you're communicating to students and you know what their page looks like and you know the progression, we teach best what we're most prepared to teach.
Sure.
And for a lot of people, that becomes here's my comfort zone because I know what I need to interject and what I need to add to this. But yeah, I think those are great books too. Yeah.
So, and don't change just to change, right? Use it as long as you want to use it, as long as it's being effective. A couple things that I thought of as you were talking. One, yeah, I know that you're an advocate like I am of programming music that's easy enough. You were talking about reinforcing skills. I think if we're over programming, it's hard to reinforce those skills. So, a message I think we both have is program easier music. The second thing is when you're talking about 6/8, I learned a long time ago that a really good source for 6/8 material is nursery rhymes. And
Yeah.
so many kids, well, all the kids, they know certain nursery rhymes. So I actually have a couple sheets that I've done for my band kids. I guess you could call them companion guides or whatever. And it's all just nursery rhymes for 6/8. And so they get used to, like, when they're playing, say, Old MacDonald, they're not playing the rhythm on the page, they're just playing by what they know, but it happens to be the rhythm on the page. So then, if you're looking at, I mean, how many rhythms are there in 6/8? I know that at one point there's probably 10, 11 like little rhythms.
Yeah.
So if you can see some of those basic ones and equate it to what they already know from their musical experience, then it works really well.
I
Um,
love that.
if you remind me, I probably should put that on the folder for people who want to see that.
Yeah.
That would be good. Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about backward mapping.
Yep.
In my understanding, this is like you set your goal for the end of the year and then you figure out how you're going to get there.
Yeah, in a perfect world, if we're saying that the literature, if we're going with the premise that the literature becomes how you're accessing the curriculum, how you're teaching all these skills, then for me right now, and I'm working on a new one as part of a curriculum project right now for the county. But you look at what at the end of intermediate middle school band, these are the skills that the students need to have by the end of the year, and picking music that supports those, and then filling in where will I hit all of these concepts so that the music is going to be those benchmarks. Yeah, this was one that I did a while ago for like a beginning intermediate middle school band class. And I used this at the time. We were using a method book, maybe Tradition of Excellence, Standard of Excellence. I'm trying to remember, but I kind of coordinated the book with what our county program of studies was, the information it was giving me. And so these were the things that when I needed to introduce things so that I could make sure they got all of the skills over the course of the year. It wasn't anything fancy. The one I'm working on now, right now, it's just a lot of scribbles, but it'll end up looking like this, so that I make sure they have the foundation for the skills along the way. Um,
Could I interject?
yeah, please.
For the people who are listening only and not watching on video, could you basically describe the simple group of columns that we're looking at?
Yes. So there are a couple different pages here, but the first one that we're looking at right now is concept introduction. And I just split the year into September, October as the first column, then November, December. So each month has different concepts that I would want to make sure that I would cover with them so that they were ready for everything they were going to need to see in the music and need to perform. So in September and October, I the very first thing there is a theory pretest, and that kind of guides a lot of it. That helps me know what the students are coming to me with. But there we start talking about articulations because I know that is something that it's just embedded in everything I do. And talking about how we're going to articulate the syllable we're going to use, the shape of the mouth, the shape of the tongue, the placement of the tongue in the mouthpiece, um, all the way down to we're going to talk about accidentals, and we're going to talk about a little bit about sight reading and composition and improvisation with that to get them ready for the things that we'll be building. And then in November, so in September, October, I might focus on, as it's listed here, quarter notes, half notes, whole notes, and rests. And then in November, go to eighth notes and rests. In December, go to single eighth notes and rests. January, 16th notes and rests. Then eighth and 16th note patterns, dotted quarter notes, so that I'm kind of building
Mm-hmm.
the skills each time. And we have lots of time to practice before I give them something new. And this is just a guide, but
Right.
and
And,
it felt like it also matched in with the music that we were doing.
and each year, so this, I know you're talking about going to something different, but this is basically your year no matter what. And then, give or take, and then you can insert pieces. So for maybe a new teacher who says, "Oh, I want to do this piece," but then all the concepts are in February or March, or if January, okay, maybe that's going to be a second semester piece for your group rather than the first semester piece. And I
Yes.
would urge, if people are listening, if they just jump on YouTube and check out the video, they'll be able to see the picture of what this is. And I'm sure you're okay if they just steal it.
Oh, yeah, and thank you for explaining that more clearly. And the idea being, yeah, if there's a piece they wanna do and they decide they're gonna do that for assessment for us, which happens in March, then they have to tease out all of the concepts that are needed, and then they have to figure out where they can organically fit them into the year so that the students are getting those skills in the right order that they need to get them, and they're getting them in an amount of time that offers them comfort and um so it's not too much all at once.
So
Your
what?
explanation was better.
Oh, stop. So what advice would you give if somebody said, "That's a great concept, I want to make my own"?
Do it. I mean, that literally, like, just pick a piece. So if you do a brain dump and you're pulling out everything that you think the students are going to need for a particular piece to be successful, and then you kind of look and go, okay, at what place in the year could I and should I share this information, and how does it build? So that you make sure by the time they get to that piece, they have all that salient knowledge they need and they're able to put the piece together. Because we all know there's all these extra things in putting a piece of music together that is like that is only going to come organically from the music.
Mhm.
And there's plenty of difficulty. If a student can play every note and rhythm in a piece, there's still plenty of difficulty of just getting the ensemble together, but it frees you up to do that. It frees you up to talk about shaping and nuance and conversational lines in a piece because you've taken care of all of that base knowledge that they need.
And as you're planning all the things you want to squeeze in before you do the piece, people need to think about what their schedule is. So, like, if somebody has a
Yeah,
schedule where they meet an hour every day, well, lucky you, that's great. And so you might be able to get it in by a certain point. But if you say, well, I see my kids twice a week, for 45 minutes. So you have to
yes,
make sure you're not trying to squeeze too much in. And I bet you the younger teacher, because I know I did this, the younger teacher says they can do X, Y, and Z in this amount of time, but then they realize they're just rushing it. They're just kind of rushing things
yeah.
in. And then the next year they go, okay, I need more time to introduce this.
And I'll argue it also helps you to identify if a piece is ultimately appropriate.
Yep.
If you can't fit in all the teaching that is needed for that skill acquisition, then perhaps it's not the right piece at this time.
I talk about, we've been releasing a lot of episodes about like younger band music, right? And a lot of times I'll say, oh, somebody says this is a grade one, and I'll have my wife come over. Hey, would you call this a grade one? If I might think it's a little harder, a little easy or something. And sometimes she
Yeah.
agrees, sometimes she doesn't. But one thing she says that I forget about, especially at the young band level, is she'll say, well, that has too many independent parts. I might look at
Yes.
the rhythm and the range and whatever, and then she'll say, there's four parts happening right there. Beginning band is three, right? Or something like that. So thinking about,
2, right?
or two, right? So thinking about
Yeah.
like that, I just never thought about that.
Yeah.
I think about things like within the level of literature I work on, which is like 2 to 4, 4 to 5, something like that. It's all about like, okay, is that in horn and alto? Is that just clarinet, or
Yeah.
is it double? Like I think about doubles. I don't think about, oh, there's like 5 things happening at once, and obviously that's a consideration.
And I think range is something that, like, you really need to look at as well, and if a piece has your trumpet players playing, you're a trumpet player, if you're playing a G above the staff, those kids have to regularly be you have to build into your fundamentals, practice going up to an A. Because
Hmm.
if you want them to perform a G, they've got to be able to go higher than that. And this is where I think
And it's got to
sometimes.
sound. It's got to sound good. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes, and I have been as guilty of anyone as this. I think I have and I still fall into this, but I have the advantage of age at this point where, what's the difference between someone with more experience and less? I've just made more mistakes.
Hmm.
I've just done the mistakes more times, but we look at a piece, we're so busy working on like this for this concert cycle, and the method book and the fundamentals and everything that support that, that all of a sudden that's done, and then we go, okay, here's the next set of music, and we've got it picked out or whatever, and then we're like, oh, my kids aren't ready for this and this and this and this. And we have to be incredible multitaskers, and we have to be in the moment but also looking ahead. And if there's range coming up for a next piece that is appropriate for those kids, great, but you've got to be working on it well before they get that piece, because otherwise then they're going to go into panic mode.
And we were talking about range. Obviously, every instrument is different. Some it's strictly about muscles and air placement and things like that. And other times it's
Yeah.
simply learning a new fingering, right? It depends on the
Yeah.
instrument. I can speak from a brass side of things. Like people, if you don't do long tones, lip slurs, like you have to do those things. They're super boring for certain kids, but finding ways like having long note competitions or having a clock up and saying we're going to follow the hand on the clock, and like whatever you got to do to build that muscle is really, really important. And you were talking about G to A. Like, first of all, G is like, that's a really hard note to play in tune because it's sharp. Especially if you're pinching, it's going to be super sharp. And then A, like I'm a firm believer as a trumpet player, if you can play a concert G, if you can play that A, you have a high C. Like the A brings you up to, like, from G to A is a huge break. That like F to G is kind of like anything up to G is kind of one thing, but then once you go above, like you get the G sharp and the A, that's a whole other feeling. You're like really into the upper register. So that you're right about like really trying to reach over that. I also believe, I'm kind of on a soapbox here, but I had a great so a great trumpet player is Craig Skevington, who was my band director, and I had John Furman, who was one of my band directors, who was also a trumpet player, and they just gave us stuff that was too high for us, and they said just keep trying, just keep playing it, and all of a sudden I was playing super high and not really knowing
Yeah.
how and why. So I think there's a balance between asking, if we always stay within your kid's range, I'm just thinking trumpet and trombone right now, then they never sort of expand the range. But how do you, I don't know if you can help with that. Like, how do you give them opportunities to learn these upper notes and go for high notes and be okay with missing notes as they're going up high, but also wanting at concert to make it feel very comfortable?
Well, I mean, I embed it in the fundamentals. I embed it in scale work. We do Chikowitz flow studies. We
Hmm.
do,
Those are great.
F stretch.
Flow studies are awesome. People should do those.
Yeah.
They're great.
Yes. And they're good for everybody because especially, I mean, as you go through and do it in different keys, you've got woodwinds, not just practicing not just practicing more, chromatic fingerings, or more unusual fingerings, but when to do chromatic fingerings and lots of left and right clarinet pinky key work. Um, but I think I definitely feel if the kids are never asked to play that high, they will never play that high. It's not
Hmm.
going to get easier. And yeah, as a brass player as well, it's like some kids are going to progress fast and some are going to progress slower, but you just have to give time for that. But if you never, if my clarinets are never playing above high C, then they will never be able to play above high C.
Hmm.
But I do embed that in the fundamental work. And beyond a certain point, and I have the kids trained that like our first sounds are always the best sounds we can make. We always start in middle range. We start low and slow, middle, and then we expand from there. But after a certain point of our like quote unquote warm up time, then when we're doing scales, they've got options and they kind of self select. Are you ready to go on to that second or third octave? And if you are, this is the time to do it. And it doesn't sound great, but
Hmm.
it sounds better as time goes. And then all of a sudden they're able to play, two or three octaves. But if we never give them chances to do that, and I feel like fundamentals are the safety place for that,
Sure.
even more than having a kid do it at home. I mean, I feel for kids practicing at home and like we don't know what they're dealing with. Like some really supportive, some have, siblings who are like, stop that racket.
Yep.
So I feel like in the safety of our band room when we're all in it together and then celebrating, man, that sounded terrible, but you went for it. And tomorrow that is gonna sound better. And and just reminding them the skills they need to do that, reminding them, all the technique, the tongue placement and the air and like giving them visuals of like I talk a lot about like riding your bike up a hill. You're not going to
Hmm.
stop when you get almost to the top. Like you got to keep that momentum going. And But I think, yeah, giving them opportunities to do that.
One thing I love about the flow studies is, at least the ones I've used, you start on that concert F, the fifth of the scale, and you do a little chromatic, but you work down to the low B flat, and as you add a note every time, whatever note you end up adding, you're going down to the low pitch, the fundamental pitch every time. So
Every time.
it doesn't allow them to start cheating to play those upper notes. They still have to keep the right fundamental embouchure. And the other thing I was mentioning, you're talking about players. I've noticed that in a lot of new rep, it doesn't require the clarinets to go up as high. It's written so the clarinet sounds better. I mean, like, do the original Salvation is Created and tell me your clarinets, like that asks them to just live up in flute land all the time. And I think a lot of composers, I mean, I'm not knocking them for this, but a lot of composers
Yeah.
now, especially at grade 3 and under, kids aren't asked to play above, and the second clarinet part is below the break, which is a good thing. But just thinking about an intentional way to get your clarinet players up there. Last thing on this, the way I do that is actually through our pep band music. I, like, once or twice a year we'll have to do like
Yeah.
an indoor pep rally or whatever, and I have a bunch of kids over the years, probably 60 or 70, who've done these pep band arrangements that I have, and if anybody wants them, just email me and I'll send them to you. But they're easy to play, but I always have the clarinet players like up the octave, and it kind of forces them to do that. So that's just like in the realm of suggesting that kids do it and have them go for it, and it's got to be safe. So, okay, so you've done a lot of what we call companion guides. Can you do I'm going to put it up here on the screen for people who are watching. What is a companion guide?
It's basically turning a piece into a method book. And it kind of came from this, like, I love in method books, one of the things that I love about it is that it makes the same asks on everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And being married to a tuba player, I know that, I know from just things that he will tell me, a lot of, like, growing up and misbehaving in rehearsal happens because, they're back there and they're bored.
Yep.
And if you have a strong low brass player, for example, they're just not asked the same things. So we depart from the method book type work into a piece. All of a sudden, it's the game changes. We're all playing the same game, and then it's like, okay, now you play very little and you play all the melody.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a way to keep everybody engaged in the work of the piece, and make sure everybody gets those opportunities and those skills. And it helps in a lot of different ways as well, tangentially, which I can get to. One of the things for this personally as a teacher, I can tell you that I learn a piece better. Like, this is the ultimate score study.
Mm-hmm.
When you go through and look at, like, what is every part that, like, really is foundationally important to this piece. Where are all the melodies? Where are the counter melodies? Where are some baseline parts that have, like, wicked difficult rhythms? And how can I support the kids in learning all of this? I think companion guides can be really individual for a particular group. I find that even when I do a piece again that I've written a companion guide for, I always go in and I manipulate the companion guide, because
Yep.
maybe I wrote it for a group that needed extra help for the horns, but maybe this year I have killer horns and we don't need to do those particular things.
Right.
But
And
it just gives everybody the stuff. Yeah.
can we just walk through the one we're looking at here? So again, if this is, for some people may have done this before, but you basically take everything from the score that you think you're going to need to work on. So first thing you have on this is you have the scale of the key that we're in, right?
The key that we start on. Yeah.
Okay. And then you've got some rhythms that, instead of putting them up on the board, they have them here. And then from there, you have things like, you have the different melodies here and counter melodies, and then the minor scale that you use at the end. But
Yep.
it's just, I've done these as well, and it's not hard to do. You just figure out, what do we need to do, and then you write it down in score format. Do you ever you always give them individual parts like this, or do you ever have them look at the full score?
For the
companion
piece.
guide.
Oh, well, since the companion guide's unison, I always just give them just their part.
Yep.
I just do it like this. excuse me. And it's also in picking things to put in it. I always think about what are the things that I know I'm going to need to spend a lot of rehearsal time on.
Yep.
And if it's, for whatever instrument, it is a way for me to get that work done without making everyone else just sit and wait. And we were talking earlier about range. I think this is a really great way to help students access range as well, and practice in those ranges, because it's not a perfect, I don't think any companion guide is perfect for every instrument. I would
Sure.
argue that there's probably a reason that sometimes the flutes have this melody and the tubas don't, and it might be the accessing a wider range, things like that. So sometimes it's hard for some kids range wise, but I actually like that. And I kind of prep it with the students that the goal is not that we all play this perfect. Like this is a means to the end, a means to an end, but we won't perform this. Although I will say in particular years, if we do something in a companion guide and then in the piece, maybe I only have one or two euphoniums and it's just not quite enough. It's really easy to say like, hey, tenors, go back to that companion guide. You're going to play this here.
Hmm.
And you can just kind of piece it in. But I do present companion guides along with pieces, but in the best use of the companion guide, I present the companion guide in advance of the piece.
Sure.
So again, they're getting that information and those skills before they see the piece of music.
So, ultimately, when you do this, it's basically getting it so your whole band can play all the themes and all the things that are needed, and then you can mix and match as you want. What are some other benefits that come from this? One that I can think of, I've done this some, but not as much as you have, is I find that the kids know the piece better, and they can listen to the other parts better because they've played the parts that they're doing, and it helps them in that way.
I think that's an amazing part of it. And one of the reasons that we all like working out of a method book as well is it it clears the waters a little bit for us. It's easy to
Unison
yes,
band. That's great.
yes, unison articulations, unison phrasing, unison shaping, unison notes. And so it really does allow us all those reasons that we do a method book. Usually when I'm working in a companion guide, it replaces that part of class that might be where I would do like the unison technique kind of things,
Hmm.
because I'll do it through the companion guide and I can make sure that we are all listening and matching. That's what I love about like anything unison. It's like sound like the person next to you so that we can then apply that in the music and we get our ears ready for that.
I've also done some companion guides where I throw in an exercise or two in that key. You have the
Yeah.
scale, and then you throw an exercise that you're going to want to do anyway. So you throw it in; it's on the same piece of paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Um, Great. So I think anybody can do that. And if you're not a computer tech person and you don't have Sibelius or Finale or Noteflight or MuseScore, there's a bunch of free ones too. Find somebody who is, and like my wife doesn't love doing these, but I will do them for her, and that works really well. So that's a great service that you do with these. Are yours available to other people anywhere? I don't
Um,
know the answer to that.
yes, I'm always willing to share them. It A part of a long-term project I have is putting them all in a spot because at this point, I feel like since I started doing them, I've changed computers so many times
Hmm.
that they're all living on hard drives. And I want to get that organized. And we were talking about I used to use Sibelius and now I'm using Finale. And so it's not that hard to like transfer it over. But I know that at one point my husband had linked a few on his website,
Hmm.
andrewhitz.com. I think there was a page there, but anybody could reach out to me. And if I have one for a piece, I'll share it for sure. Like we should, but again, I encourage like, revise it for your group.
Yep.
You might need different things. But I love them and I love, again, but it's all like this is part of that pre-plan. This is part of that, like with that curriculum map and the backward mapping, this is all part of being ready for something. But I will say we just looked at Tales of the Emerald Isle. That was a guide that I used for camp that just finished on Friday. And I will say that I did do a second version of this partway through camp, like that just had like a few more lines because
Mm-hmm.
I realized, okay, this didn't cover these three things that we needed. And I did that for one day. Like I shared it one day and worked on that, and it solved all the issues that I was trying to solve in that piece, which it feels kind of magical to me when it works out. And it's a great opportunity too. I know, people have to deal with equipment availability, but I'm a big believer that in the fundamentals and things like that, I put all the percussion on mallets. And
Mm-hmm.
for the guides, I have them do mallets as well. And even if they're playing snare drum on a piece, if I'm going to spend a concentrated amount of time in the guide, they're all over on mallet instruments. But if I'm doing like a quick back and forth, they might just stay on, whatever their drumming instrument might be, and I'll give them some other job, tell them something to listen to, or maybe they have to be my metronome on the rim of the snare drum or something like
Yeah.
that. But it makes sure, I think it makes sure too that they aren't separate from, as a drummer percussionist, they're not separate from what's actually happening melodically as well.
And I think companion guides are not just a middle school thing or an elementary school thing. I think they can be used if it's right for your group. I've done it at the high school level. I can think of a couple pieces that I did it one time and then I came back to do that piece again like 5 or 6 years later. And I pulled out the companion guide and I mapped it up. I matched it up with the kids I had, and I was like, I don't need to do one. I didn't
Yeah.
need to do it at all. So I think
Yes.
they're flexible, and that's what's great about them. Okay,
Yeah.
let's get into programming.
Yeah.
You believe that over programming is a deadly sin, I would assume. And so, do you have any stories? Any times where you've over programmed and you're like you had to stick it out, or like what are some lessons we can learn
Yes.
from you?
My gosh. Well, I mean, I think it's, the reason that I think sometimes band directors get these like bad raps for just being grumpy and cranky and like they're always just fussing, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think when those situations happen, most of the time, I can't speak to individual personalities, right? But most of the time, I think it happens because it's stress induced. Um, and you're fussing at kids about you don't practice enough, you don't whatever. It's stress induced because you're at the ask you're making on the kids is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And and you're grasping at straws to try and make it work, because ultimately at the heart of everything, we want our students to have an incredible experience. But it makes us like we
Mm-hmm.
panic when we know, like, I am not going to get the kids here, what do I do now? And it's that fight or flight. And so we can't flight, so we fight, right?
Yeah.
um but I know that I've experienced that in the past where I am a very reflective person, and I kind of gauge my mood, and I can start figuring out, like, when I am least prepared for rehearsal, that is when I am normally the crankiest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because things aren't going the way I want them to go, but I'm also wasting all this time because I'm not prepared, or I'm not prepared for how to prepare the kids to do it. But again, it normally comes up to the ask is higher than what their readiness is and what they can do. Um, and so that's like, I mean, I've probably, like everybody else, I've had to change pieces sometimes. You mentioned Chip DeStefano earlier. My gosh, like, what an incredible band director, person, everything, musician. We had a year, it's been a few years now, but where he adjudicated our assessment, and I can't remember I'm not great at remembering details. I can't remember the circumstances that created it. I don't know if it was weather or if it was just like getting close and just realizing we were not going to be able to get all this music ready. But I had a co-teacher, and for assessment, we do a march and then two concert pieces, and we knew we weren't going to get both of these concert pieces ready. And so just a few weeks out, maybe two, we were like, okay, we have to do something because this isn't fair to the kids, like.
Mm-hmm.
And pulled out another piece, and it was not a great piece, and the kids ended up, it was the right level for them. We were able to put it together in a short time, but I remember him, like, he wrote a note to us after and was just like, this piece does not honor the student's ability. But like, it was so we didn't give them a good piece of music because we were trying to solve this problem of over programming,
Yeah.
where if we would have just been a little bit more organized with our thoughts and maybe thought through things, we would have been able to avoid that. But it ended up, the performance ended up fine. But yeah, like, we had to read his words and kind of reflect and go, yeah, like, we solved that problem, but we created another one because we wasted all this time and we wasted their talents on a piece of music that wasn't particularly well crafted.
Sure.
He created a lot of problems.
So when you sight read a piece, I was taught the kids should be at 60, 70% when they sight read it, something like that. So I think that's a good way for people to think about it. If you like, it's either sight read a section or all of it, however you do it, if they're not kind of over that 50% mark, there's a good chance that it's too hard for them. Also knowing when to bail, it's like a sixth sense, right? And I think you develop it
Yeah.
as a teacher. Sometimes okay, this is hard for them, but I know they'll get through it because of X, Y, and Z. But then I think I've gotten to a point where if I'm working on a piece and I'm like, this is just not the right fit, I'm tactful enough and early enough I can bail on it. So that it's okay to bail on a piece, right? Especially if you've done it early enough. And my suggestion would be, if you have a gut feeling, go with it, and that's usually right.
And I wish I could remember the whole thing. I wrote it down somewhere. But I just heard someone say a formula, and it was like 80% of the students should be able to do 80% of the things in a piece. And then there was like another embedded, of just, it doesn't have to be everyone, but there has to be enough that can pull it along.
Yeah.
Um, and but also, getting a read from the kids, I think, is really important. And if I ever am between two pieces that I think will both work and there's similar ability, there's similar asks of the group, and I'm not sure, sometimes we'll read them and then I ask them, and sometimes the piece that I thought I was like building a whole program around this one cornerstone piece, and they're like, yeah, we don't really love it. So they have to be passionate about it, but we do too.
Hmm.
We have to believe in a piece and know that it's gonna take us through to the end, and we're not
Yeah.
we're not all gonna be tired of it. We're gonna be humming it because we love it,
Yeah.
not because we're so sick of it.
So I know we're going to talk about some other tips that we haven't talked about for young band directors. One I have that you were just talking to is we're talking about the bell curve, right? I think one of the things I was taught, I probably didn't listen, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But program to your middle 80%. So don't take the low 10% and program to them. I mean, you want to get them to achieve, right? But you can't basically, everybody else can be waiting. And don't program because you have 6 kids who are amazing. Don't program a certain piece just for those kids. Now, if they're solos, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But program to your middle 80%, and then you'll be safe. Um, so, what other like big picture tips do you have?
Well, can I add one thing to that? I was worried about that this year, because just in the recovery period after COVID, my eighth graders this year were online elementary kids, and
Mm-hmm.
so just trying to push them enough, but not, I feel like my kids have come back in this really, they're like in this just really happy place. Like, they just are happy to be together and they love playing, and I
Agreed.
want to push them, but I don't want to go back to that, like, where they feel so stressed and anxious about things. And I was speaking with a colleague about it, just about worrying that, like, these 3 or 4 kids, was I honoring what their abilities were? Because was I giving them enough? And they were like, well, they all take private lessons. It's like the couple kids, that those high, like, rising kids. And I said, yeah. And they were like, okay, so you're giving them an ensemble experience and a team experience, and their private teacher is going to push them. So
Mm-hmm.
I know not everyone has kids that are taking private lessons, but like, that was helpful to me, of like looking at, maybe those particular kids weren't being pushed technique wise or range wise, but I was offering a push in different ways. And just, being able to kind of parse out all the things as band directors. There's so many things that we're offering kids,
Hmm.
and it doesn't have to look the same for every kid. The what a you know the growth that the student has or the experiences they have, it doesn't have to look the same. In fact, when it doesn't look the same is probably when it's most successful, when the kids are getting the most out of it.
And don't assume that just because a kid can play, they really always want to be pushed. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes they like playing pieces that they're not, they get pushed in other things, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think the literature thing, picking appropriately, is like a huge thing. I think for all of us, I all of us post COVID, but for any new teacher, especially, of just making sure that you're picking appropriately. I think a lot of teachers are putting pressure on themselves of, well, I have a grade whatever band. It has always been a grade whatever band. And again, I think I have the benefit of age in a lot of I think age benefits us in a lot of ways, because it's a lot easier for me to step back and just go, I'm not going to worry about that. And no one's going to bug me about it, because I can just be like, I'm old, like, leave me alone. Um, but I think it's harder for younger teachers, especially if they're going into a program that has a historically has a reputation of certain grade level or things like that. But I think allowing yourself to pick music that is appropriate for your group, and then look at what grade level it is.
Hmm.
Just like, look at a piece, look at the craftsmanship of a piece, look at, does it offer every student something that's going to be great for them. I love a piece that has a low brass melody. I'm not going to lie, because they don't get it enough.
Hmm.
So, like, for me, a great, like, if I'm looking at a great piece, it offers something for every section. It does not just have low brass playing ones and fives the entire piece. It's going to have some challenge for everybody and some room for growth for everybody. And a couple years ago, um, another band director, Robert Herrings, that it teaches in Texas, he talked to me about programming, and it was like this shift of the sand under my feet. It was like, all of a sudden, it wasn't ground anymore. It was like, whoa, I'm moving all the way over here. And it has been, just in the last 5 years, it has been such a fundamental change in my teaching. It's been so freeing. He says, let's say you want to get a group to grade 4 at the end of the year. So their last concert is going to be grade 4-ish type of difficulty. The concert before would be grade 3-ish. The concert before would be grade 2-ish. And the first concert of the year, they're going to play grade 1 music. And he said, that's what I do with my kids.
Hmm.
And I was like, so my first thought is, well, if Robert Herrings does this, it's good enough for him. It's good enough for me. And I tried that, and he was right. And my kids didn't feel like it wasn't challenging enough, because in the beginning of the year, when I gave my eighth graders grade 1.5 music, it freed us up to do all of these other things in class that wasn't just music. Number one, it wasn't just concert prep. It gave us time to work on our range and, like, establish all these great fundamentals and establish these great routines. But it also gave us music that was so technically accessible to us that I was able to then say, okay, this articulation has to start together. Are you matching? Here's the phrase length. Here's the phrase shape. I was able to dot every I and cross every T, so that we could play the spots off of that page. And then those skills that we focused on, that I was able to focus on with them, because we didn't have any technical worries. We were able to take those habits that we were building and
Sure.
put those in place on the grade 2 music, and then in the grade 3, and then in the grade 4. And it's like that. It builds those habits of, am I matching? Am I listening? Am I shaping? Am I breathing just to breathe, or is it a phrase? If it's 3-4, am I breathing between 2 and 3? Like, and I thought that was pretty magical. And so I think, not worrying about, like, is this music hard enough, but thinking about, what are we getting out of this? What are
Hmm.
our goals with this piece? And where is how is this going to long range and long term help us to grow and build our growth? And I think that that was pretty powerful for me. And I learned that way later in my career. And I think that's something that I talk to when we have a lot of universities near us. And when students come and visit and they talk to me about things, that's a piece of advice I always give them is, you don't need to decide that, stop labeling, because they ask, well, what grade band is this? Like, just as much as you can. And I know it's situationally
Hmm.
important based on who's talking in your ears, but as much as you can, like, just look at the kids and look at the music and look at what the goals are. And, like if I have a grade 4 band, I'm playing grade 2 slow pieces, because a grade 4 slow piece is not going to sound great on a grade 4 band.
Sure.
They're not going to be able to access the musical demands of that piece. And it's not just about fingers and range.
And what I love about that whole approach is that you're starting the year and they sound good. They have confidence,
Yeah.
they sound great, and they love it. Most kids are not, especially young kids, they don't go, oh my gosh, this is not enough notes. They're like, this is fun, we sound great. Like, who doesn't want to be in that group? And then imagine you're in a group that's the opposite, that's playing too hard, and the kids don't know where they're in the music, and it sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to be part of that band. So I think that's a huge thing in the culture too. If you're of your band, if you're programming easy enough, they always get used to sounding good, and it's
Yes.
just great. The other thing about programming easy enough music. I was watching. I forget the name of the community band, but Richard Floyd was conducting it down. It was down in Texas. It's Rippling Watercolors by Brian Balmages, which is a great piece,
Yeah.
and it's technically a grade 2, right? But I mean, it's basically a pro community band, and they sound ridiculous. And I don't think
Yes.
anybody would say, you know what, that's a grade 2. You shouldn't play that. If
Yes.
it's good music and the kids can access it, then they should do it.
Yes. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I'm all about doing, hey, we're going to do a grade 4 and a grade 2 and a grade 5 or whatever. Like, it doesn't
Yes.
matter.
Yes.
I think so many of us have, especially when we're younger, we say, I'm a good teacher if, and oh, we're going to play Lincolnshire Posy. That means I'm a great teacher. Well, you can have your kids play it. Doesn't mean it's going to sound good, or it's the best piece for them. So,
And it balances their classroom experience, because it's not every piece where they're just having it to, like, mentally, like, oh my gosh, this and this. And it allows them to focus on different things with different pieces. And I think for an audience's experience as well, like, it's really nice to just be able to, like, relax and listen to something sound so great.
and when the band always sounds good, the parents love it and they enjoy the
Yeah.
concert, and that goes a long way too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Last thing I want to hit on, you were talking about, some tips about being a mentor,
Yeah.
mentoring other people and also being mentored.
I cannot say it enough. You got to find your people. You've and I think, like, young teachers, like, find them as quick as you can, and grab onto those people. These are people that will support you, that don't, that are not in competition with you. I think it's hard because this is just my soapbox now. But in music, we all grew up in these in music programs, and from time to time there's competition, right? We compete for chairs, we take our marching bands to contests, so we're competing against other bands for places and things like that. And so it becomes really easy to embed this idea of competition and better than, when it comes to how we are looking at ourselves as teachers. This compare game is super strong.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's healthy for us. I think we're all teaching in different situations. We all teach different kids. We have different parents. We have different communities. We have different funding, et cetera. The list goes on and on and on. And we are each different as people as well, and the skill set that we bring and that special sauce that we each have, like, it's unique to us. And so you and I could conduct the same band, and they're going to sound different with each of us, because there are things that you are going to hear in the music and in those players that you're going to draw out, and there are other things that I'm going to draw out. Maybe your rhythmic precision is going to be really great with them because that's a priority, or maybe it will be for me, or maybe you'll play really long phrases, or it just, whatever it is. We are all so different, and we all come from different places and do things differently. So if you can find people that you're not feeling like you're in competition with, you're not feeling like they're comparing themselves to you, or you are comparing yourselves to them, I think that's like the first step that is just really, really powerful. And people that will help you, that will talk about literature, that, if if I'm having trouble, like, we just talked about this thing with the G to the A. Well, I'm going to think about that. And I'm probably in the fall going to be, okay, give me some more tips on this. Like, I'm going to come back to you. And I know that you'll be willing to help. People that will help you. And when I started in Fairfax, those people were, and I do feel like, I feel like internet and social media and all that actually makes this a little bit harder. I'll be honest. I think it makes it a lot easier to have relationships with people. I think it's a lot harder to have like those trusted mentors because you don't see people as much. And like, I think when I started in the county, there were directors like Linda who, took me under their wing and helped me and encouraged me and gave me opportunity. And I felt very fortunate for that. And that mentor relationship of, they were definitely mentoring me. They were like almost like my teachers, right? And as I have progressed in the field now, in addition to those people, I'm finding mentors that are my colleague mentors, meaning like, similar experience, and similar experience level. And so it's a different type of mentoring, because these are not people that now see me as student. They are people who just see me as colleague. And I can go to them, with anything. Like I mean, I think that year that I talked about with the over programming, I am certain at that point that it was like a phone call to Linda of like, okay, talk us through this. Like, is it okay to change piece? Is it like people that you trust their opinion, and you trust that they have your best interest in mind, and at heart, and that you will do the same for them, that you will give them. It's not about saying, there are enough people, we're musicians, there are enough people that pat us on the backs. We finish a concert and there are people that applaud for us. Where else does this happen, really? I mean, except in the arts.
Sure.
So for me, it's those mentors that will have that honest conversation, that I could run my pieces by and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. And that they'll, take 5 minutes to go, so last concert, this happened, you forgot that you needed to prep them for this, or something. That will have honest conversations that aren't just about, that was great. And I think, starting those relationships and building those relationships as soon as possible is great. But then also, acknowledging if you outgrow those relationships, as we go. But I just think like that, having like a trusted circle of people that you can say all the bad things to. You can say, I screwed up and this piece is not working and it's my fault. Help me. And they will help you without judgment. Because, there's plenty of judgment. We can find that anywhere we look. But like, I think if you give that to people, they'll give it back to you. But you have to feel comfortable. And I think like, let that wall down and be comfortable and find the people that will reciprocate that.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.